Today I had a great conversation with Jayant Bhandari, and he's such an interesting man, originally from India and emigrated to the United Kingdom, but he never got a chance to tell his backstory. And I'm not going to do that for him because we're going to have him on again. But I did want to say this, that he travels the world looking for investment opportunities in the natural resource sector mostly. He was in Japan when we had our conversation, and he's delightful, interesting, has extremely strong opinions on the consequences to America of mass Indian immigration, especially in the way that we're doing it. His caution, well, it's unrestrained. He really puts a point to his argument. And I've learned things. I thought I did a good study of India a few years back and understood it. There were things that I had upside down that I was understanding from a very Western perspective and absolutely not from the Indian person's perspective of their own culture and history. And so I got such an amazing education today in this conversation. What a delight. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. And again, his name is Jayant Bhandari, and I got it wrong, the Bhandari part, when I was introducing him. Anyway, it's so good to have you here with us. I hope you enjoy. It is such a pleasure to talk to you about this very sensitive issue. I think it's sensitive because Americans care very much about people, and they care very much about being fair. It's just kind of part of our culture, the way we look at things, and we maybe can go too far with it, with allowing wokeism, which is a tragedy, into our culture, and critical race theory, and all these other things that hopefully have seen their day pass in 2025. But I want to be sensitive in my conversations on this because the issue is so real. It is so dangerous and destructive to America that if we do not, in my opinion, my humble opinion, get a hold of it, we're headed for a downfall in an entirely different way than I think a lot of Americans understand. So I'm calling this series, just so everybody knows and remembers, it's called America First Immigration. And what we're talking about is the immigration industrial complex. And so today I have Jayant. Oh my gosh, I didn't memorize your last name well enough. I can say Jayant Bhandari, but it's, how do you say it?
Bhandari.
Bhandari. Well, that's nothing like I say. But it's a pleasure to have you, Jayant.
Thanks very much for having me on, Elizabeth.
Now you're in Japan.
I am currently in Japan. Yes, that's true.
Speaking or consulting or some other wonderful thing? Or are you vacationing?
Well, we have certain investments in Japan. So I actually these days spend a fair bit of my time in Japan and in China. And I actually admire the Japanese culture, the Japanese society, mostly, Elizabeth, because they copied and pasted the Western values and Western culture. And they have retained and perhaps improved on those. So I'm a big fan of Japanese, but mostly because I'm a big fan of Western culture and Western values.
Well, let's take you back and do a brief overview of where you're coming from. And I mean that literally. You were born in India. Which state in India were you born?
I grew up in a city called Bhopal, which is the capital city of Madhya Pradesh. Madhya Pradesh is right in the center of India. Mm-hmm. And I think that those days, the population of combined Madhya Pradesh, which got split into two provinces, was about 120 million people or something like that. It would be the biggest or close to the second biggest country in European Union if it were a separate country.
My goodness. When you study India, which I've done a little study in the past when I was homeschooling, we spent a lot of time on India just as a case study. of how to study another nation. And it's so vast, so complex. The history, it goes so far back, and especially with Islam and its incursion there. And then, of course, the British. I mean, and then, of course, the breaking up in 47 of India into, breaking off Pakistan and Bangladesh. Well, originally they were East and West Pakistan. There's so much history. There's so many people and there's so many languages. I can't remember how many languages there are, but it's in the hundreds, isn't there?
It's in thousands.
Because everything about India, when somebody says, well, we'll talk about the caste system, and then they'll just give this little simplified, because we all have to work on simplified models of, well, there's like 5 castes or whatever it is, 7, whatever it is. And then you probably would tell me, no, there are many more castes than that. It always expands.
There are, well, yeah. So, when you use the word complexity of the Indian culture, that actually derails you already. The situation of India is that it is not complex system. It's a mad system, which means that there is no system in that country. And once you understand that, you realize that you have to see that society as a wild society which has no underpinning, values, no 10 commandments, and no real system. When the Western eyes look at India, it wants to systemize its understanding of the country. So they want to pick up a few dots to start in their minds, create an abstract understanding of India. But you cannot understand a forest by creating trying to systemize in your mind, because there are no paths in the forest. There are no, everything is wild. Now, the caste, when the British came to India, they thought they needed to create a structure of Indian castes. Now, India actually has no structure in its caste system. And what the British did was that they created these 5 divisions to simplify an understanding of what was happening. But now you put a major error on what was India, because you create a system on something that is by definition not systemized. So if you talk with a guy from the village and ask him caste, his caste will be so completely different from anything else you would have heard. And everyone has his caste, which is his local village, local area, and that is also his nationhood. When I was growing up, these people had no concept of India. Their nation was their caste and their religion was their caste. And also, Elizabeth, just to complete my statement, the concept of Hindu is also a British construct. Now, it's easy to read about it, but because the way we are taught about what Hinduism is, it confuses us completely. British gave a singular name to all these disparate pagan religions who had no connections with each other. So they started calling it Hinduism. In fact, the national language of India, which is Hindi, is also a British construct, because these people could not communicate with each other. So British created Hindi, which is the national language of the country. So most of what you think is the complex history of India is actually a British creation, British concoction. In fact, even the Indian history is a British creation. Indians had no history. It was the British who started putting together history based on what they read from the writings of Chinese, Islamic, and European visitors. Indians had no clue about their ancient temples. They had forgotten about them. Those temples were lost in the forest, and Indians were clueless about the major kings like the Maurya or Guptas who ruled the country for centuries. Indians had no clue about it. It was the British who put that history together. So you should be skeptical about everything you read about Indian history, because British put that together from different sources. And so, yeah.
So you have just clarified some things for me, because I will hear, well, I'd heard the thing about caste before, one caste, and I understand I would do the exact same thing if I were British. Back in, I don't remember when they first landed, but I would start saying, I've got to understand this, so I need a chart. I need lists, and I need hierarchies to understand anything. I need maps. I need histories, as you just said. So you take a caste system, which, let me see if I understand this correctly. I've started to come to the conclusion that India was always, in a way, an empire, because a nation, if you called, I'm sorry, give me an easier name for one of your states in India.
MP, Madhya Pradesh, the short form is Madhya Pradesh. India was never an empire. The moment you impose the concept of empire on India, it does not work, because everyone is an atomized person in that country. India was always a tribal area where all these groups of 10 or 50 people fought with each other all the time.
So it's like the Middle East history.
No. Middle East is a heaven compared to India. You have, and this is the Western perception which confuses people. Now, Middle East is bad enough, Elizabeth, but Middle East can be decent. They can actually create stable societies, as they did in UAE or Bahrain or Oman, or even
those
Saudi
are
Arabia.
Tribal entities, whereas like in Iraq, there might be 700 different tribes. And if you actually drew lines around them, it would be more like in India, but in a different shape. And in the sense that Iraq is tribal, in other words.
So what also, again, the Western mind thinks in duality, which is right and wrong, good or bad, legal, illegal. That's not how the Indian mind thinks. In the Middle East, you already start thinking vaguely about right and good and bad, right and wrong. They have some vague sense of objectivity. Now, let me be very clear. I don't like the Middle East. I visit the Middle East quite often. I don't like it, because I don't like it when I look at it from the Western perspective. But from the Indian perspective, the Middle East and North Africa are heavenly countries. Because India is a wild place with no concept of morality, no concept of virtues, no duality. The way the Indian mind works is that what I can get away with is good, if I want to use the Western word good, and what I can't get away with is bad. Again, using the word bad from the Western mindset.
Okay, but the big objection, firstly, in America, I mean, you're very Western. You moved to the West decades ago. And I did see you talking about, struggling to come to understand this when you were giving a speech in Turkey, and how you transitioned, and, you successfully did that. You're very Western, as far as I'm concerned. I would not know that you were not Western, other than you have an accent. And so the thing is, in America, we're very sensitive about these subjects. I'm much less sensitive, because I think I look at it in the way of like, come on, let's just talk about reality, and we don't have to have our feelings hurt. I'm Irish. Everybody, when my family came to America, all of the doors said Irish need not apply, and everybody was a drunk. And the Irish, I don't know what else they said about the Irish. It doesn't bother me. Of course, everybody's a little different, every culture. And plus, if you just came from Ireland, maybe you'd have a problem with it. So I want to be sensitive and say this. If we're looking at a culture, that does not mean that every human being that lives in that culture is the same way. I would say that we live in a Judeo-Christian culture in America, but the exceptions to that rule individually would maybe be greater than the agreement with that rule. And so I just want to say to whoever's watching this, don't get mad. We're going to talk about sensitive issues, and Jayant is going to tell it from the perspective of somebody who was born and raised in India, moved from India, encountered the West, and wants to try to explain those things to Americans. I've just learned, I thought I kind of knew a little bit about India. You just like turned the tables on everything that I thought I knew. And so we're just going to be frank. But I have to say that because I really do believe that we need to solve problems here in America because they're big. And if we're offending each other or taking offense, don't do that, then we can't do it. So, but I want you to feel free to speak. So what you're saying is that in India, when I called it an empire, I'll tell you why I did this. I was mistaken in saying it that way. I was thinking of it as here, like maybe there is one governing, like when the Muslims came in and took over so much of India and Pakistan, of course, that there would be one king or sultan or governing body, and that all of these various language groups and tribal groups and everything were coming under this one hegemonic power. Okay. Now, what you're talking about, though, is tribal, and that's very atomized. Tribal, if tribes don't just say, okay, we'll all be subjected to one tribe. 200 tribes don't normally say, okay, we'll let this one tribe stand for up. But like with UAE and Qatar, as you were mentioning, Qatar is one family. Saudi is the family of Saud. So in the Middle East, a lot of these successful countries are headed by a monarchy or dictatorship of some sort that is one family or the dominating family, and everybody else is in submission. Explain India. Further explain India, because I'm very interested in getting back.
So again, this is again the Western way of looking at things. If you look at the issue is not whether India is ruled by one family or whether all those kings and princes were relatives or not. The problem with India is, unlike what is in the case in the Middle East or certainly what is the case in the Western world, is that there is no concept of do's and don'ts. Whatever works is good. Whatever I can get away with is good. And if I can beat you and rape you and I can get away with that, it's all perfectly fine. And I will actually feel honored if I got away with that. And society will congratulate me for it. So,
but you wouldn't say that about your father, yourself, your grandfather, your mother. So there is a culture. We could have a culture in America, but then we have individuals and sub-pockets of culture too, right?
You can have complete idiots and crazy, criminally minded people in the Western world. So I'm talking about an average here. But let me expand on what I mean by what I said, the generalized statement I said. If you asked me to pick out 10 honest people with integrity and values, 56 years old, if you wanted me to pick out 10 people, I will struggle with that, Elizabeth. Whole lifetime, I might not have met 10 people who I could say that they were honest and had integrity. Now, if you wanted me to find 10 people in the US, in San Francisco, I can find 10 people in a week's time for you, probably in one morning, reasonably good people. So that is what the difference is. You're talking about no different universes. These are people with totally different moral systems. In fact, I would say there's no moral system in India, because India cannot be systemized. You have to look at India to really start understanding it. You have to see that as a wild play.
Okay, if I were a philosopher, and I'm not, so I'll pretend to be, but I read the scriptures and I understand them very well. And you brought up the 10 Commandments. Western civilization was not founded by the Greeks. It was founded by the scriptures. Really, the faith of Israel moved. Actually, it was Egypt was Christian before the Muslim conquest. Syria was fully Christian before the Muslim conquest. So they conquered 2/3 of, or 2/3 to 3/4 of Christendom or the Roman Empire. So anyway, if I look at the foundations of Western society, yes, there's Greek stuff and there's some great Roman writers and history, but it's mostly based on a Judeo-Christian worldview. And obviously within Exodus and Deuteronomy, we have our 10 commandments, and we have a God who is loving and just and righteous. And he believes it, from Leviticus, we get love thy neighbor as thyself. It's not just from Jesus, Yeshua. He's quoting Leviticus in the Torah. And so these same truths, the 10 commandments are a distillation of the Torah, span almost the entire length of the scriptures, because, Adam and Eve are outside of that a little bit, as far as the 10 commandments, obviously. And so it's consistent. And it goes from Judaism, to Christianity, which basically split at that point, but they were from the same foundation. Okay, now we have this cohesive idea of right and wrong, one God, we're all responsible to him, government isn't God, people have duties to obey the commandments of God. Now, in India, you have a very different religious base, and you were starting to tell me that the Hindu, I want to hear more about that. It's the first time I've ever heard it. I've always wondered why some Indians will say God as if there's a one true God, an almighty God, and then I will hear that there's a million idols or gods, small g gods.
300 million or something. There are as many gods as there are Indians, basically. If you go to an Indian temple and if you watch people worshipping at an Indian temple, what you see is that they don't come to an Indian temple for spirituality or for peace or to develop harmony. Indian temples are noisy places where people go to get God's blessing, and blessings means material reward or a better next life. That's all Indian care for. So basically, fertility. So a lot of young women start worshipping, fasting for Lord Shiva once a week so that they could find a good husband. And when you ask them what a good husband means, they don't care about whether he makes money from bribes or not. They don't care about his character. What they care about is how much money he makes and how fair his skin is. And these kind of things, very superficial, are what they are looking for. So Indian religious views are very materialistic. There's zero spirituality in it. And these temples are also very noisy. So using the same word religion, when you use it in the Indian context, confuses your mind, because when you think religion, you're talking about values, you're talking about 10 commandments, you're talking about a sense of right and wrong, a sense of the what is good for the larger society, what is good for the future generations. But when you are in India and your religious beliefs are solely focused on material rewards for yourself, which might be about more money, a better husband, a better wife, or be released from disease, or a better afterlife. So these are the things the Indian mind is focused on when he goes to the temple.
So I think I'm starting to at least get a better understanding, because with one true God and his holy word, which we believe is the word of God, sacred scripture, we study that and we derive, it's almost like an endless study because I'm reading the book of Jeremiah again. I don't know how many times I can read that book, and I could just keep reading it over and over again because it just constantly gives. The depth of it is so extraordinary. So anyway, I'm focusing on one person. We consider God in a spiritual sense a person, and I'm focusing on him and his order for the entire universe. But if you have millions of individual gods, family gods, or tribal or little village gods or something, it's almost as if they're constructed or sprang out. I'm not trying to be too specific, into whatever that village needed or that family needs, and it suits, in a sense, the purpose. We call this idolatry because what we say is, if you're looking for a God that's going to fit your criteria, that's called idolatry because you're worshiping whatever you want, right? And so if I have a stone, I don't know if you could see George Washington anymore, but if I'm worshiping this is because I've decided this God is good for me and my family and my village. And so I'm not conforming to the God. I'm sort of picking a God or crafting a God that more conforms to me. But then where does this one God idea, whenever I hear Western Indians, and by the way, I want to say this too, I think it's a very difficult thing to talk about because there are many lovely, Jayant, you're one of them, Indian people that I have known, and now I have a new friend who's an Indian, who I think I would respect their worldview and their ethical standards, their morality, and trust them. And so we have to say that, okay, instead of me putting words in your mouth, which I don't mean to do, would you say, though, that someone coming out of India can make a transition to really embrace Western values and come to understand them and live them almost like, a second suit?
No.
Or part of
No. Right. No. So this is the situation, Elizabeth. The moment you talk about one God and one set of values, it's not just about one God and it's not just about being against idolatry. What happens when you have many gods is that your worldview is as an arbitrary sense of how the world works. When you really start living among white people, you also start to understand why the religions of the desert were so much against paganism. Because if you are a pagan, you will look at the universe in an arbitrary fashion. You think that things happen because of the will of the God, will of whosoever you pray to. They think that the life and universal principles are arbitrary. They live in an existential crisis. So it is as if the basic operating system of their mind is very, very different. It does not think that 2 plus 2 always become 4. In their minds, 2 plus 2 can become 0 and they can become a billion or infinity. So their minds look at things very differently, and that has repercussions in every aspect of their life. It has repercussions in their decision making, their sense of responsibility, their sense of duty. So this affects absolutely everything in their lives. So you have to really understand that the basic operating system in their minds are completely different, and erasing that and planting a new operating system is a virtually impossible task.
Okay, but with all things, with God, all things are possible. Let me say this: I'm an American. I guarantee you that if I went at 20 years of age and went to go live in India, Russia, or something, well, I don't know how old I would be, or how young I would be, where they could basically wipe out, because it's not genetic. I mean, there's genetics that are obviously, every culture, society has predominant genetic traits and all that. But what I'm saying is a religion or a structure of society and all this is sort of inculcated into the person from the very womb. I mean, in Gaza, they teach little children to hate Jews when they're infants. You can't just erase that out of a 37-year-old man's heart or a woman's heart after they've heard it for 37 years on a daily basis. And so I think for me, and I'm not trying to argue with you, I'm wrestling, and because this is kind of actually enjoyable. I'm wrestling with this thing. I do believe with God all things are possible. I do believe that people can change, though it may be a struggle. I believe that if I went to go live in Japan, I'd stay an American always. Like if I went to go to Japan now, I'd learn some language. I would, love to try to be Japanese, but I'd still be an American in Japan. So I think depending on youth, the time people come, the many generations that they're here in America, the kind of family they're coming from, that change is possible. Because I don't believe that you can think like you think, breaking things apart. You may still resist some part of you, but I think that is possible. So let me do this. I want one last question in this area. I really wanted to go and get your backstory. I don't even think we're going to get there because I need to get onto HR, H-1B rather, and OPT hiring and all this, because really where this is going, one God. Is there any sect of what this thing that is no longer, to me in my mind, Hinduism? It's a cacophony of gods that the British mindset had to put a label on. And so that's what we've done. And now I understand why I get different stories, and I never understand why aren't any of these stories right? I mean, the same. So you've got millions of gods, and you've got sometimes one God. Why can someone who says, I practice Hinduism and I believe in one God, how can they say that?
They can't and they shouldn't say that because, this is something that you would hear from a person like Vivek Ramaswamy, who interprets Hindu religion through Christian, Catholic, Western eyes. But when I want to cherry pick 10 commandments from anything, I can, if you provide me 100 worst books ever written on the planet, and you ask me to cherry pick 10 commandments from those, I can go through those 100 books and find sentences that match with 10 commandments. And that's what I think the British did. They translated the forgotten scriptures of India. Remember, everything was forgotten. Indians had no concept of their history.
So the British resurrected that by translating?
Absolutely.
The Bhagavad Gita?
And
the Vedas?
Yes.
Right.
This is all Western creations. This is all Western translations. The languages were completely forgotten. British deciphered those languages. The Pali language was deciphered by the British.
Okay, so we won't even go any further down there because I'm utterly fascinated because I did read excerpts of both of those books and I could not finish them. And I could not because my mind could not comprehend what these books were trying to say, whatever. So we're going to leave that. I'm not trying to critique anything about this. I mean, I know what I believe, and I believe in a one true God, the God of the scriptures. And his son, Yeshua HaMashiach. So moving on, we don't discriminate in America based on religion. So you can be an atheist in America and you can get a job and somebody's going to just give you a job. But that's not the problem that we're finding here. We're not talking about religious persecution or favoritism that we should impose on our society, change the Constitution, the First Amendment, anything like that. And this is not about racism or skin color. As a matter of fact, every time I've seen a survey or a study done by Pew or is reported in the Washington Post, India is literally the most racist country on earth, or in the top 3, countries, because it's almost endemic to the culture. I want to say that I'm rejecting racism here. Should anyone want to cut up this video and make us be saying something that we're not? Okay. So now let's talk about H-1B. Now, you know a little bit about this, right? The various visa programs and the controversy that has been going on since Christmas time in America. It was Vivek's Christmas gift to America. It was really fun diving into the controversy. So tell me what your thoughts are.
So, Elizabeth, I have over the last 15 years spent a lot of time between between Philadelphia and San Francisco, living among people who work in the IT sector. Now, it has been known for all these years that there is hardly any difference between legal and illegal immigration, because you can concoct any kind of document you want in India. If you, Elizabeth, wanted a PhD degree in something, in theology or something even very vague or obscure, something unknown, I can get it made for you for a few dollars. It's not a problem. You can get anything you want. It has been known for decades that the legal immigration is backed by fake documents. But moreover, even if you interviewed people on Zoom, what you might realize is that the person you are facing might be different from the person you are talking. The person you are facing in a technical interview might just be lip syncing to respond to your technical questions. So this has been known for many, many years. So I don't differentiate between legal and illegal immigration. Again, this is a good segue from where we started talking, because Indians have no concept of right and wrong, moral and immoral. They are immoral people, so they have no guilt about...
Would you say more like... I'm so uncomfortable with that word. And I'm not trying to... Okay, here I am being... trying to be a people pleaser, and I'm not really trying to do that. What I'm trying to say is this, is I find it hard to say 1.8 billion people. It's so crazy.
So 1.45 million.
1.45.
1.45 million.
Yeah. A million there, a million, billion, whatever. 1.45 million people are immoral, because that really bothers Americans, okay?
I didn't say, Elizabeth, that they are immoral. I said they are amoral, which means that they have no concept of morality and immorality. Immoral people already have a concept of what is moral before, and they know what they are doing is wrong. Culture does not inculcate the concept of morality. It's an amoral society.
You know what you're telling me? Something that's just crazy. I've always loved my scriptures, my Bibles, and I'm making a little personal confession right here. I've always known the value of this scripture, but now I know it more, because I think how I'm interpreting what you're telling me is this. We have this thing called the 10 Commandments that we value so highly, and so many people fight against us because we value it. I'm saying internally in America. Whip down the 10 Commandments when it used to be on when my husband was in grade school, they went in and prayed, and there was the 10 Commandments on the wall. But what it occurs to me is I can always go back to that and say, thou shalt not kill. And I know always, thou shalt not murder. It's against the 10 Commandments. And I can keep going back there. And if I have to go deeper, I can go to Exodus, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, whatever I want to go to, I know, and the Gospels. But what I think you're telling me is because of this tribalism and these, so hundreds of thousands of tribes, I don't even know, millions of gods, and since there is not one holy book that they all look to, whether they interpret it differently, and they don't have 100,000 holy books or 10,000 holy books, they have those books that they do not set out.
Have no books. They have no books, really.
Okay. So, because I've tried, I've seen, and it's really more like a story, but it's not really about God speaking to anybody. And so that is why a culture over time would never have latched on, or it would have been harder to this system of this is absolutely wrong, objectively wrong, this is objectively true, this is objectively false, and this is objectively wrong. Objective truth and objective good is something that comes from the scriptures according to my faith. That's where it comes, because it comes from God. It comes from God. And so without that, you don't have this foundation. No matter how much we crumble the foundation straight from it and chip at it, we still have the foundation. You're saying they don't have that in India.
Yeah. So if because of me you die, if I make $1 and if you die and I don't end up in prison, I will laugh it off. That is what the culture basically means. They don't really care. There's no value attached to life.
Is that like
There's
karma?
no value.
Is that karma? Like it couldn't be bad if I got away with it?
All those belief systems are derivatives of the fact that this is society. India is a society which has no concept of values. Everything is arbitrary. There's no objective truth. Everything is subjective. Everything is morally relativistic. Everything can be rationalized.
Okay, so this goes back also to I'm these little moments where
and Elizabeth, just to complete myself, when you and I, there are a lot of very good Indians. You will see a lot of them in the US and in Canada, in the United Kingdom. A lot of goodness of India that you see is what I personally call Christianized Hinduism or Christianized Islam. So these are not people who got their values from their own societies, but they decided to cherry pick what they learned from Christianity and
absorb it
and try to cherry pick those things from their own text, if at all there were any text,
and synthesized it.
Well, this is just you are basically a Christian Western person who thinks that that India or whatever has those values. So Vivek Ramaswamy, I heard some of his interviews and he says as if there's no difference between Hinduism and Christianity. He went to a Catholic school. I went to a Catholic school. Okay? So it is the missionary schools that crystallized, which precipitated certain values and moral structure in these third world countries. Christian missionaries worked for centuries trying to bring and create a moral fabric in these third world countries. And now we think that moral fabric existed in these countries already. But
we're looking back. We're looking at today and what we see and experience personally. We go to the pharmacy. We talk to this really lovely Indian man, and he's just so charming and sweet and everything. I talk to you, and I'm imprinting my view of India in my mind is today. That's the man that I met. But I'm not looking at the whole scope and how we came to various, how I came to that conclusion.
Yeah, but although he is being very American, in India you do not smile, you do not say thank you, because those terms are seen as signs of weaknesses.
I've heard that. As kind of like a weakness because, well, okay, you know what? I asked the question about the one God. I'm starting to understand more because I've heard, well, of course, as Christians, we will say, if you believe anything is true, then you believe nothing is really true. Because everything can't be true that is contradictory. Like I can't say, this is a God and there is one true God in the heavens. And those two things can't be true. So if you're raised in a culture that is so ancient, this culture goes back and the roots are there and you're surrounded and immersed in it, you're raised there. And what you're taking is, you can have a God, I can have my God here. I can actually enjoy your God sometimes, and we can have different gods and kind of, there's a synthesis in a way so that all things are true, nothing's true, and it's all relative in a sense.
and in their minds, there's no cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance
Right.
exists in a rational, objective mind. In an irrational, subjective mind, in a single sentence, they can say contradictory things, and they don't see that they are contradicting themselves.
Okay.
So
So
that's
moving
how
on,
confused thinking is.
I'm really going to listen to this all over again because I want to infuse it in my brain a little bit more because you have been really helpful. No offense to any Indian and Indian Americans that are listening. I just mean that. We're just talking. I hear people trash talk America all the time. I don't call them racist and I don't get angry.
But Elizabeth, I owe my honesty in speech to Western people, particularly Americans, because they are so self-deprecating. They speak the truth rather than what sounds good. When I was growing up, the concept of truth, as I already alluded to, did not exist. We, of course, use the word truth, but truth to me meant, in essence, that whatever was good for me was truth. It was when I started living in India, when it was when I started living in the United Kingdom that I realized that truth could be spoken for the sake of speaking the truth. So
Even
this
if you didn't
was
like it, even if it didn't do you any good, it's true no matter
yeah,
what. Okay. You know what? We could go on for a long time and maybe people would like us to, but we have to talk about this series. And obviously, the reason I'm talking to this fine Indian gentleman, and I plan on bringing other people from all over on this call to talk to them about their experiences and their thoughts on this subject. We're talking about America First immigration. I want to tear down the immigration industrial complex that is destroying America. And I have this brilliant conversation partner, interlocutor on this topic. And I'm so glad you're with me, Jayant. And what I want to talk about now is this. Everybody knows now, almost everybody, because of X and freedom of speech, that Americans have some cold water in the face, and many Americans understood our immigration problem to be almost virtually limited to the narrow scope of illegal immigration, with the asylum hoax in there as well, and just variations on that theme. And then we got into a conversation in December, around December 26th, 27th, I'm not sure which, that was started by Vivek Ramaswamy. I don't want to go into what he said, but it really upset people. It was touched off by a few things. I want to go into the meat of the problem. I've been talking about different aspects of this system to different people from different organizations. For instance, one of my videos was just on the medical field and how that is being changed by the F1, the OPT, and all the rest. I want to talk with you about recruiting and hiring and managing and HR heads. If you have something to say with that, and we have other things to talk about, but what I'm hearing from Americans that is heartbreaking is that there's 2 million Americans in the STEM fields, that's their graduate degree in a STEM field, science, technology, engineering, and math, that have never had a job in the STEMs after they graduated, or are no longer there, or are unemployed entirely. I am finding that there are thousands, I'm reading their personal accounts online, I'm hoping to interview many of them, that are saying that if I go to be interviewed, this is from Black people and white people, Americans, in a tech company, or maybe it's online in the process, if I hear an Indian voice or see an Indian face, I already know from experience, many, many experiences, that they will not call me back. I will not be hired. And this is also coming from people within companies. So it's not just ignorance on a person looking from the outside in, and they don't really know that that's not what happened. It's coming from testimonies from the inside. and then managers, which are incredibly, humbly humiliating in the way they treat their white minority, token whites in their departments. And then another point is when an HR head or is hired that is Indian in an American company, what will begin as a cascade or domino effect of every person hired from that point on, unless there's special circumstances, will be Indian. So that's kind of the big picture and of what I wanted to dig in. Do you have something to say about that?
Well, yeah, that's absolutely true. This is exactly what happens. Remember one thing, though, that they hire Indians only one reason, which is that they know how to exploit other Indians better. They are doing no favor to other Indians. They don't want to hire Indians to help out Indians. If they did that, that would be morally a better situation in my view. But they hire other Indians for only one reason, which is that they know how to exploit other Indians better, which means that they can make these Indians work longer hours, pay them lower salaries, etc., etc. Once you have a certain number of Indians in an organization, because then the concept of average kicks in, and then even if you had one or two very good Indians, it gets diluted. The character of the group gets diluted. You will have dysfunctionality emerging. Everything in India is dysfunctional. Nothing really works. And if you asked me to inquire about the recent plane crashes or the forest fires in Los Angeles, etc., I can tell you that no technical committee can pinpoint the real problem, because what happens with DEI and having third world people is that millions of micro compromises start happening, and small cracks start appearing which no eyes can actually see. But the cumulative effect of those micro compromises is that planes start falling, forest fires start happening, and nothing works at one point of time.
And equipment fails when you need it. That one plane that basically fell out of the sky, and I've read the story many times. I can't attest to knowing definitively the answer, but was it Boeing that started outsourcing because they said our code, and apparently this Boeing jet is so complex that it is literally just, I don't know how to describe it because I'm not a technical person, but that it is such a complex piece of equipment, computer equipment and systems, that this whole plane, if this complexity is run virtually by the computer. And they started outsourcing to Indians in India coding. And
absolutely. And you use a term you said I cannot pinpoint. And this is what I actually meant, that when you start making small micro compromises, you can no longer pinpoint where the mistake actually happened. But it's the cumulative effect of thousands of dysfunctional, dishonest, immoral people working together in a fake organization, because they are atomized people who backbite and backstab each other. You will have planes crashing. This was the issue with MAX 747 or MAX 737.
737. So let me say this. The whole outsourcing thing is blowing my mind. I was looking at the fact that there's 3 million customer service people in America in 3 different levels of from management is like 555,000 managers and 1.75 or something like that of one category, and then associates were another 600,000 or 7, whatever, 3 million. And I started trying to nail down how many of those were outsourced to India and the Philippines. It couldn't find the information for me. I finally said, okay, the Department of Labor surely in the last 20, 30 years has done an in-depth, rock-solid study on trends and status of outsourcing, say, customer service, maybe the last 20 years. And no, the Department of Labor hasn't done that. I'm wondering why they don't do studies that every American would love to know. And what I'm saying is this, that when we are outsourcing, well, that's outsourcing, I don't know, I'm going to say 2.5, 3 million jobs just gone out of America. Profits are coming into American companies, but Americans don't have jobs. And Americans don't like foreign customer service. I mean, it's 1 in 100 that you say, this is the best guy. I'm so glad I could understand what he said. He was so helpful. Everything was just A+. That's very rare. And we hope that it will be, because that's our heart. What I'm saying is that this whole thing is around recruiting and hiring and managing, and hiring as it starts off with a desire for the bottom line to be as fat as possible, no matter what the cost, because, just no matter what the cost, let's bring the stockholders more profits. But then it morphs into something new. And this is where I want to get to the effects on jobs and culture, when now Indians are doing all the recruiting in outside companies or outsourced companies, and they're doing all the HR and the management, and they're hiring Indians. And so literally the culture is being brought to America, and jobs are being lost to the tune of multi-millions of jobs. Is that correct?
Yeah, India is a country that cannot produce its own ballpoint pens. They have to import components of ballpoint pens to that country. It's a country that is so dysfunctional that manufacturing sector in India continues to fall over the last 3 decades. People don't understand it. Now, always think about why India has no company of international reputation. There's not a single company of Indian origin that you can say came up in India and is creative and innovative, and it creates top quality product. Now, what makes you think that the people who could not create their own companies would come to America and bring creativity and innovation to American companies? And what makes you think that in a complex environment of America, these people would sustain your complexity and sophistication? You should actually understand very quickly that this is not a matter of transferring 3 million jobs from America to India. It is about bringing it in dysfunctionality where everything will start falling apart. And that is what you see with bridges falling, planes falling, forest fires, and these things will keep increasing because you have imported dysfunctionalities of these people. And a lot of, when you are working in an organization of 50 people, Elizabeth, you cannot monitor each person all the time. You have to trust in that person's moral fabric. Now, out of 50 people, if even 1 person or 5 people don't have the right moral fabric, your system will start falling apart because
especially because it's all computers. I mean, you can't put errors in code. I'm going to go back to George. I can produce this, and if I have, a small dent in it, it's still a statue of George Washington. There's no moving parts. There's no digital parts either. And with code, you just can't mess with codes in nuclear power plants and in systems like all of our, didn't just the other night, I missed it because I think I was asleep, our power go down in a major sector. I can't remember what it was here in America. Well, now I'm looking really dumb. But anyway, we had that big blackout across the country from some code. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
where planes couldn't fly?
Well, yeah, I remember that, Elizabeth, and I'm an electronics and computer engineer. As an engineer, I educated as that. And I tell you that people I talk with in Philadelphia and San Francisco tell me that the code written that comes to America from India is so badly done that if they have to make even small changes, they find it easier to rewrite the whole code rather than just pick out the bad code and correct it because it's so gobbled up, so confused. And remember, go back to our earlier conversation. And the problem is that because of immorality and irrationality of Indians, there's a lot of
Amorality, not
confused
immorality. Just to correct, because
immorality.
well, I thought you said this because I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
And that has influence on decision making and everything that these people do.
Yes.
And if you are not aware of it, you will bring in dysfunctionality. And America has indeed imported dysfunctionality to the US.
Okay, so what we have is we're bringing in a culture en masse. When you bring in, if you brought in one headhunter into America, not calling anybody a headhunter, or one cannibal, you could take one cannibal and you could teach him, you could grow up and say, you know what, I've decided I'm not going to be a cannibal anymore. If you brought in 25,000 cannibals and moved them into small town USA, you may have some problems on your hands because it's going to grow. It's probably because it's cocooned. It's got its own little tribe now right in the middle of small town USA. And, no offense to anybody using that as an example. It's just the easiest one I use. The point is that when you bring millions of Indians that have this background, you don't bring them in, by the way, you don't bring them in and they start getting these jobs 20, 30 years after they arrived and started assimilating or assuming the culture and the standards. You're giving them jobs day one off the plane. And they're coming as Indians unless they go through the F1 OPT process, but they're coming in as Indians into America and starting work, doing business the way they did it in India before they got here, right?
Yeah. So, Elizabeth, just a couple of more things here. In the building that I live in, India is a British concept. There was no India. There was never an India. In the building that I live in, San Francisco, there are separate groups of different regions of Indians. So there's a group from southeastern part of India, a separate group of southwestern part of India, a separate group of Punjabis, a separate group of Bengalis, and they don't talk with each other. They are as if they are different nations. And a few weeks back, I came up with a term called intellectual inbreeding. This is something that I have seen among people, people who immigrated. There's a certain kind of intellectual inbreeding happens. And I thought I had concocted a great term because it sounded so good to me. And I looked for it on internet and I realized it's actually a well-known, it's an accepted concept in psychology. So when you bring in so many immigrants who start living in their isolated ghettos, they not only bring in the culture of what they left behind, but then they become intellectually inbred, which means that they live among a very small society of their own kind. And there's a strange kind of peer pressure that happens. And there's a strange kind of fossilization of thought processes starts happening among those people. And this is the biggest problem with mass immigration, because now you no longer assimilate. You no longer apply any pressure on these people to assimilate, because they can all create their own ghettos, marry among themselves forever into the future. And that is what we are seeing today in Canada, in the US, in the United Kingdom.
And once someone is given, is naturalized and becomes an American citizen, you can't go backwards. You can't say, okay, well, now you guys can't have this little group here. You have to spread around the country. You have to immerse yourself. Mass immigration, by definition, is destructive to any country and virtually any stable country in virtually any scenario. And I'm sure we could find an exception, but I'm not willing to go there. So going back to your coding, friends, because I'm very, very interested in this. I have read account after account after account. They're very, very believable. They are rational, calm, and I would say heartbreaking sometimes. Sometimes it's just like basically cynical. And how many times it's spaghetti code, some of them call it. They get code. It was done by a group of Indians, a department, whatever. And then somebody has to go in and they can't find just one mistake. It's impossible to disentangle that spaghetti that didn't get the olive oil on it early enough. And they literally have to toss that spaghetti out and start all over again. And what rational Americans say, and this is, I think, easy to bat out of the park, but rational Americans would say, well, it doesn't make sense. Obviously, they're hiring the best and the brightest, because why would you hire people that are going to create this kind of dysfunctional picture? It's a culture. It's not an individual. A dysfunctional culture, a culture that will actually discriminate and break U.S. anti-discrimination laws and produce bad product. Why would you do that? So it can't be about money, because otherwise they wouldn't be doing this. You know, you know what I'm saying? It must be the best and the brightest. None of it makes any sense. Why are American countries doing it? Is it about the money?
Well, in the short term, it might be, because a lot of people are focused on the next quarterly results, particularly the managers. Now, salary of an Indian software engineer in India is $3,000. The starting salary is $3,000 a year, not a month. $3,000 a year, which translates into $250 a month, is the salary of an IT engineer in India. So you are paying at least 30, 40, 50 times in the United States. So the thought process among Americans is that even if I have to employ 10 people instead of one, and if everything goes all right, I would save a lot of money. But what they don't realize in the long term is that there is this spaghetti code, as you rightly said, which has dysfunctionality and problems in it that lead to such a big disaster for you in the future, that you should not be doing it, because quality has more value than quantity. But there are many things. One is that there is this short-term profit orientation, but also Americans are very politically correct. They don't want to talk about all these problems openly. I work with American companies who want to invest in the third world, particularly in India, and they just sit blankly when I talk to them about the problems they are actually facing, because they don't want to show any signs of emotions, because they don't want to give away their political correctness. So I think a combination of many things is working out here. But my own experience is that companies who don't follow DEI, the companies who don't aggressively employ third world people, who only employ based on meritocracy, are the companies that are sustainable in the Western world, and they are doing extremely well. And you bring in a dead fish into your company and the whole pond gets polluted.
And then I was thinking that we go back, because I agree, money short term. Two, I don't think that everybody knows when they start down this road where it's really going to take them. You know, they just figure, it's like, I'm hiring somebody who's French, Japanese, Indian, whatever. Luckily, they don't make enough money in India. I'll just go with India, right? And so it's just a bottom line decision, and they always think probably they can course correct if it doesn't seem to work out. But do you know how those things go? It's just like a government agency. Once it's instituted, it continues. And I think also that going back to this terrible outrage, and that is that once a manager in a department is hired that has a particular point of view or preference about something significant, about the kind of people you hire, that is where it's going to go. And it is endless, the number of people online that say, once I've seen stories where entire departments You brought in one Indian to be the HR guy or the manager over the entire department. Maybe there's 100 people. And within 6 months, there's a couple of Americans left, and everybody has been laid off, and they trained their Indian replacements. And this is not just the ones we've seen in the newspapers. This is elsewhere. It's all over the place. And I'm also saying that, for instance, we use Rackspace as our email, and I couldn't believe how many problems we were having. And then I'm seeing an engineer online saying, well, once you start going with this down this Indian road because of the inferiority of the coding, well, look what happened to Rackspace. And I thought, that's why the entire company lost like $1 billion because it was hacked, because their code was so bad. I didn't research it. So do you think that once they are built into the system, will we ever have companies again, all these companies that are now all Indian or 50% Indian, which is their goal? They say Google's now 40, 50% Indian. They want to go maybe all the way. Will that ever be sloughed off and Americans take those jobs again?
No, they won't. Again, Indians prefer to work with other Indians. They want to have employees who are other Indians. Indians themselves prefer to work under European because they know that when they report to a European manager, ethnically European manager, they are treated better, they are treated fairly and kindly. But an Indian manager will exploit them. But an Indian manager prefers an Indian employee because he knows how to exploit them. Again, going back to our earlier part of our conversation when I said that Indians are irrational and amoral, they also don't have the concept of quality. So if they have to pay 1/10 or 1/50th of the cost for something of low quality, it does not matter because for them it's the same thing because they can't differentiate between good and bad product. Now, for that to understand, all you have to do is to type India, look for some images. There is not a block in that country which is beautiful. Not one block anywhere in the country. It's an ugly country full of pollution and dirt because Indians don't have the concept of quality.
And I would say that we need to go back to the caste system because I'm going to make a proposition here. I was reading on the Harvard Law Review, I think, or maybe it was a business review, but it was a Harvard Law Review, I think. And it was a short piece on the caste system in America. And I just read about a Dalit, which is what some people call I guess it formerly untouchables, but the lowest or one of the lowest castes. And that in America, I'm trying to remember the name of the company. It's Oracle was sued because there was a caste system.
I think it was Cisco.
You're right. Sorry, Oracle, don't sue me. It was Cisco. And Cisco literally had a caste system in California. In California, which is all about plurality, pluralism and multiculturalism and all this, there's a caste system that's being built up in California. They actually started referring to the 14th Amendment as setting out as a rejection of the caste system. I'm thinking, hello? No, it wasn't a rejection of the caste system. That's different. This is rejection of something, racial discrimination, etc. And so anyway, the long story in short there is I'm going to propose, from what I've been hearing, and I've been talking on the phone to people about firsthand experiences, that white and Black Americans are the lowest in the caste system of America. That the Indian caste system that has been brought over through mass immigration, H-1B, STEM OPT, all of the rest of the garbage, that has created a brand new spanking caste system, and it's Americans that are at the bottom.
Well, they are not really at the bottom. They are actually very high up in that caste system. The first question is, why did you import the caste system that was a completely alien system to the US as a country? You should never have imported it. The second problem is that the bigger culprit here is the people who claim that there's a caste system in the US. Why are they reporting and working for Indians? Why don't they move out of their suppressed their
No. What I'm
situation of
saying is
oppression?
this proposal I'm saying is this, is that Indians brought the caste system when they take over a company's culture eventually, because, there's a tipping point. At some point, if you have 40-50% Indians in your tech department or 90% Indians, it's now going to take on the culture at some point of their home. So the caste is being brought in by Indians in that. And so I've also heard from Indians that if you're from Gujarati, if that's how you pronounce it, you're going to first want to hire Gujaratis, and you're not going to be hiring somebody from Uttar Pradesh. I'm trying to remember my geography and all this. You're going to discriminate against them. They're different castes, they're different geographies, different language. So you're mostly going to hire in your own caste, your own state, if you will, and then you'll move out from then. Those other people will be lower down, maybe on the pecking order. But one woman who's an American, an engineer, highly qualified, product manager, was the manager of this huge project with 100 people in the room. She was one of 3 white women, and everybody else was Indian. And she was treated with such disdain, disrespect, dishonesty, revulsion, as if she was dirty and horrifying to even look at. She was utterly devastated, and she's an experienced engineer, and finally left the field because it was pointless. But she was insulted and humiliated, and she was a professional engineer, computer engineer.
Yeah, that's how Indians treat each other. That's how Indians treat each other.
Oh.
They are mean to each other. Every Indian organization works that way. They are doing the same to each other as well. And they are treating Americans, they might even be treating Americans better, actually, the white American.
I think what you're saying, it's all going to depend.
Yeah.
But I say that, but then I guess my little model there is wrong, because I was thinking it was so disdainful. They must think that she's less than a Dalit. No offense to Dalits out there, but Dalits purport that they are treated in such humiliating ways, as untouchable, and that it's a horrific experience in America, which enrages me that is being brought here. So we talked about races. Go ahead.
Now, Elizabeth, I might add that when those Dalit people rise into positions of power, they are even worse. They are no better, okay? So the problem with Western mind is that it sees an oppressor and an oppressed. The reality is that the oppressed is actually more oppressive when he gets the position of power, and you have to remember that.
Yeah, that's universal. I agree. That is very true.
You can't undo that caste system. This is a very entangled system. It's a system it's a worldview that Indians have, in which they are always trying to size the other person up. You could be from the same caste. You could both be equally rich, but they are still trying to size each other to see.
There's always a hierarchy. There's always a hierarchy of power.
That is why you should not say thank you and please on a plane. Elizabeth, I'm very tall. When I'm flying in India, and when I'm flying anywhere in the world, I help shorter people take their bags off the cabin.
Mm-hmm.
The moment I land in India, I make sure I don't do it, because if I help anyone, she will look at me as if I'm her servant. She won't say thank you to me. She will look down for helping her out. So
I get it.
I have to be very careful, because people looking down at.
No, because you can't navigate in a society. I wouldn't want that, just because I wouldn't want that. So, I may invite you back at a later date to dig in deeper into what you know about the inside of. This is a great overview of your perspective on Indian culture. You've taught me things that really enlightened my understanding. And I think that the message here is that there is a very definitive ancient culture that is founded in the caste system or on top of the caste system or infused with it, whatever it is. And they've passed laws in India, but nobody's willing to get rid of the caste system. It's live and well and thriving in India. There's quality control issues because of this hierarchy and the way that the worldview of India. We're importing it, but we're also outsourcing it. So either way, there's different damages to our society. But from my perspective, my chief concern for everybody watching this is my goal is to make sure that in the next 4 years, H-1B and F-1 to OPT and all the rest of these programs that are destroying American jobs for American people is gone. That's my goal. And I think that your insight, Jayant, is lovely. I'd love to hear more. And I know you probably have to go. That's why I'm trying to wind down. Hear more about what is happening on the inside, because I have heard so much, but I want to be very authentic, and I want authentic and people that I can rely upon to give me a true account of what they've experienced and been part of. Because I think that through people's voices, their experiences, their heartaches, all of the young men and women that have applied to 100, 200, 300 jobs and haven't gotten one reply because they're all automatically dismissed because they're not Indian. These are broken dreams. It's a destruction of an economy, and it's the morphing of a people and a culture. And I think that if we're going to make those decisions, we better do it, that the Americans in America should be making that decision openly and fully informed. And I think you can help me more understanding that in the future. Would you come back?
Well, absolutely, Elizabeth. And I go to China quite often. And my question is, did China need H-1B Indians to help them develop deep tech? You actually see no foreigners in China. They are a self-sustaining society. So why did you have to get rid of your own people and bring in outsiders?
That is,
Erika.
I love to pose questions. I love to pose questions like this. And you just did the perfect, what a question like this is sort of like, if Indians are so brilliant and so much more hardworking than Americans, obviously we're a bunch of lazy, and our IQs and our ambition are so, why isn't India the cleanest, most prosperous, most, with beautiful high rises and lovely avenues, and with all these brands that they're building that are world renowned? Why isn't that success in India?
Well, even the Indians in America, they might be in positions of CEOs, but tell me one Indian who is spearheading something very innovative. Can you name one Indian who created something really innovative in the US?
I don't know, so I can't. I can't.
Yeah, so
I know there's a lot of CEOs that have taken over Google, taken over all these. Yeah,
but they are administrators. They are not.
Okay, so I got to go back. I went into my little thing and I took an eye off this ball. So what if China had just dropped a bomb in the middle of the world with their new AI system? What is it called again?
Deep sea.
Deep sea. Yeah. No, not SIKH, but SEEK. And if you can have one of those brilliant Indians coming over to a Chinese version of an H-1B or an F-1 to an OPT.
Well, they do encourage foreigners to come, but they are very selective and they will never give their passports to foreigners. So I could be living in China. I'm in China next week, and I could live in China for 3 generations. My children, my grandchildren could live in China, but they will never get Chinese passports. And that's how it should be. and they are very, very selective about who they bring in.
Is it
They don't
maintaining a
bring
culture?
Yeah, and H-1B is defined as superficially defined as a concept in which you bring in the very best, but then you bring in people to work in at 7-Elevens, which is absolutely crazy. You have all kinds of people working in using H-1B visas in the US today. And, it's perfectly fine to bring in very creative and innovative people to the US, but still, you should not give out your passport so easily because you don't know how they will shift your culture over a period of time.
I can't agree more, and it's wonderful to talk to somebody who can speak about this and not be just an American, me saying it. I think that China point is a really, really important point for us to remember that we are not dependent upon foreign labor. If we're going to make America great again, we can't do it by outsourcing our or importing others to make America great for us. Americans can and will make America great.
Well, yeah, and Elizabeth, Western people are far more creative and innovative than East Asians are. I love East Asia. They are great people, great societies. They have brought in so much of Western values in East Asia. But still, the concept of looking for natural philosophy, Christianity, and science is still a Western concept that makes Western people, I'm talking about people of European ethnicity, extremely creative. And there is no doubt in my mind that if you retained your original culture and did not become wildly compassionate and wildly tolerant, you would make America great. Not only great, it would actually, by a huge margin, the greatest country on the planet. And the same, I could say the same about Western Europe as well, Northwestern Europe. They are great people, but somehow compassion and tolerance has gone wild in these countries. They are not discerning anymore. Whereas East
Their
Asians,
religion is now multiculturalism. It's actually something that they worship, and to worship a scam, a hoax, an ephemera, whatever, a chimera, whatever words I'm looking for, to worship something and hold it to this ideal, but is completely false, literally has to twist your brain. It has to twist the way you think about everything. And Britain, God forbid, is lost. And I hope they come back, and I hope Europe does. I think Donald Trump is spurring them on to make their countries great again. And I pray for them. I actually do pray for them. I will say that this whole thing about Indians coming in and doing, well, no, let me say this instead from the reverse. We have Chinese coming in here and being trained in American universities because we have the finest universities in the world by number. And then I think the UK is second to us. India is down in the, I don't know, in engineering and STEM, down, it may be something around 90 or 100, 200. I don't remember. I'm losing it. But anyway, how they can be educated in India and come here and outperform people that are going to MIT or even, any other university or college, or they come here and they get our education, and then they're given a free pass to get our training. So when you get an education here in America, you firmly state that you will not stay in America. And then we end in this optional practical training. They first took a seat at a university from an American, paid a lot more money for it, and that's why the universities do it. Then they take a training job from an American because the company does not have to pay FICA tax, Social Security, any of those things. So there's something like an 8 or 9% savings right there, even less as well. And then they finally settle into a full-time job and take it away from another American or two or whatever over a period of time. And then they become Americans. And so to me, we are not importing the greatest talent. We are training them, teaching them, and making them great talents here, such as they are. And so the whole premise is wrong. They're not already that talented when they get here.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're really going to get the best and the brightest, like with the O1 visa, you would be finding some 30-year-old guy who had just accomplished something great, and you would bring him in and say, we're going to give you a vice presidency in our company and huge shares, and bring that person in. You can't bring in tens of thousands and say they're all the top 1/10 of 1%.
Yeah, and the best people from India and China would come to the US irrespective of whether you have H1B or not. They best people, because they are so visible and because they are so smart. The combination of these two things means that they will go wherever they want to because they are just so smart. You do not need H1B for that. H1B is more to bring in masses of people to work in 7-Elevens or 7-Eleven equivalents in IT sector.
And so your final word on this, should we dismantle and abolish H1B and STEM OPT?
Well, absolutely. But also, Elizabeth, I'm currently in Tokyo and I'm hearing from Japanese companies that now for the first time they are buying theft insurance. Now, Japan is such a good and safe place that you simply do not have theft. And Japanese have historically not brought in foreign workers. For the first time, they are bringing in workers from India, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and they are starting to have theft. But thankfully, the good thing about Japanese is that they are polite, they are tolerant, but they are not going to give these people their citizenship. Which means that eventually when the society in general wakes up to what foreign workers mean for Japan, those people will be packed off and asked to leave their country.
So you're saying Japan. That it's more than just end H1B and STEM OPT, which we didn't go into in depth and we won't. But those two, destructive and anything else that's equivalent to that within the alphabet soup of immigration of visa programs, that also that we should end this handing out of naturalization of citizenship.
Absolutely,
and we should just end it and take a break, 10-year break, and say no naturalization. Why is it, if you can come here and work, why do you have to be a citizen? And when we figure it all out, maybe we'll come to the conclusion that the Japanese have come to, that we're not going to do that.
Absolutely. And not only that, you should just have a simple moratorium on bringing in foreign workers anyway. Not only stop giving out citizenship, not only stop H1B, but have a moratorium on bringing in foreigners to work in anything. There are so many unemployed people in the US who can do fruit picking. Why are they not doing those? If you stop bringing in foreign workers, the salaries at the lower end of the societies will actually rise the way they are in, let's say, Japan, Iceland, or Switzerland, where foreign workers are not easily welcomed. Once those salaries rise, people will be encouraged to do fruit picking and do work at supermarkets. In fact, those are the jobs teenagers should be doing.
Absolutely.
After a long time in Vancouver, I saw a teenager working in a supermarket, and I was shocked. I actually asked him, I said, how come are you here, not an immigrant working in your position? And he didn't know what to respond to me, but that was after a very long time. I saw a teenager operating the teller.
Because when I was a kid, and this was a long time ago, I'm older than you, and when I was a kid, to get a job, firstly, we thought getting $1 an hour to babysit was making good money. But I'll tell you what, to get a job in a grocery store, a restaurant, cleaning toilets, mowing lawns, and all of that, I loved it. There's something about getting out there and accomplishing something, figuring it out. I thought, it was the greatest thing ever. When I was a bus girl, I was the best bus girl. ever at the Dunes Hotel in Las Vegas. And so I think that you're really putting a great perspective on this moratorium. I would say also there should be a moratorium on the extensions, because what most of us Americans don't know is that they say, oh, well, the system works this way, and after 3 years, you go home. Well, but then they add 7 years later a new amendment to the law or a regulation, say, oh, you can just keep reapplying or having it extended every single year. And so you can go indefinitely. And so we don't even have proper accounting. I can't even get accurate numbers. Do you know that nobody knows how many people are in America that originally came here on any of the visas that didn't go home? There is no count.
No one knows, yeah.
That's nuts. Okay, you have been a delight, Jayant. I can't wait. I hope you have a very prosperous trip in Japan, and I look forward to speaking to you again. And I'm going to pronounce your name correctly, the last name, Bhandari.
That's correct. Thank you.
Jayant Bhandari. Thank you for joining me. You have a lovely day. God bless you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Elizabeth.